What's up, pinheads? Welcome back to Psych Opinion. Tonight we're talking about something horror fans argue about constantly. Is modern horror actually better than old school horror? Because depending on who you ask, modern horror is either the smartest and most artistic the genre has ever been, or the exact reason people miss the classic. I can genuinely see both sides. Because old school horror and modern horror are trying to do two completely different things now. Back then, horror was usually about survival, fear, killers, monsters, suspense, and pure chaos. Now, horror often feels more focused on psychology, trauma, grief, symbolism, pity, and emotional breakdowns. And neither one is automatically wrong, they're just different. So tonight, we're going to break down what changed, what each era does better, where modern horror succeeds, where old school horror still dominates, and whether horror today is evolving or losing something along the way. This might get heated. Kind of hope it does. I hope you guys have strong opinions about this. That'd be nice. One of the biggest differences in modern horror is the shift toward psychological storytelling. Movies like Hereditary, Midsummer, The Witch, and Babadook, Steve's fave, aren't just trying to scare you. They're trying to say something deeper. And for a lot of people, that's a good thing. Horror used to get dismissed as cheap entertainment. Now horror films are winning awards, getting critical praise, and being discussed like serious cinema. But there are also fans who feel modern horror sometimes forgets to actually be fun. I get that too. Because sometimes you want to watch brief symbolism, and sometimes you just want to watch Jason throw somebody through a wall. Or my favorite, put them in a sleeping bag and slam them against a tree. Both experiences have value. So tonight, I wanted to ask you guys a few things and see where you stand on this. So my first question is, has modern horror become smarter or just more complicated?
I don't know. I think it's more complicated and kind of annoying.
Really? What's an example of that? What do you mean?
Like when we watched Bring Her Back, it was just kind of like predictable and kind of boring. And it was like, okay, like she's just kind of crazy.
I think that's funny that you say it's predictable because I think the intention there is to be more complicated, evolved, and probably trying to do the exact opposite, like give you more to chew on, more to be like, oh my God, I can't believe that happened. But I agree with you. I felt like it was fairly predictable.
I'm shocked.
Like it's like, okay, it's a story, it's her story, like we have to explain it, and then it just like goes on like gross teeth, skin stuff. And it's just like kind of trying to shock you and like and make you give you anxiety about a cat dying. So
Yeah, you definitely had anxiety the whole time about that cat.
yeah, I did not like that.
Steve,
Yeah.
what did you think about that, man? What were you about to say?
Well, I think in a lot of ways, modern horror is very akin to like modern rock and roll or modern metal, as far as how it plays off of the classic stuff, the Black Sabbath of the world or the Led Zeppelins or whatever else. And with a horror movie, almost everything has been done before. So how can you make it unique and how can you make it your own? And so I think when a horror movie comes along nowadays, it really has to hit it out of the park. To be something that's not just another footnote in the history of horror films. And every once in a while we get one of those, but more times than not, it just feels like the same old stuff kind of repackaged and maybe with a little more, like Liza said, a little more shock and awe when it comes to either CGI or some of the things that they can do from a realistic standpoint with blood and guts versus what they could do 50, 60 years ago. And in a lot of ways, watching those types of old movies where you get somebody with like a ketchup packet, and now they're, it's very cheesy, but at the time it was pretty cool. So it's endearing in a way.
I think that that's not necessarily a bad thing because I think honestly it's making people work a little harder. I mean,
You're not wrong.
And we're going to get to kind of more of the old school stuff, but I think that, a lot of the older stuff was just kind of more straightforward, whereas now, I've said it before on this show. I think the 90s for cinema really changed a lot of things. I think the 90s was a time period where people went from just accepting that something is happening to wanting to know why.
Oh, what's in the box?
And I feel like that's really the same across the board, even in horror. I mean, even when you see the remakes like Friday the 13th, which I thought was a good remake, it explains a lot more of why. It explains a lot more of that backstory. Whereas the original, Friday the 13th, they did explain the backstory, but it was over a period of time. People didn't care as much about why as they just wanted to like see it happen.
Why would you think, or why do you think, Jake, that that's the case nowadays versus before? Is it weak story writing, and therefore you have to get people to buy in with having a good storyline or backstory, as you say, versus just getting out there and blood and guts like the old school stuff?
I think a lot of it. I think that there's a lot of different factors, but I mean, I think that with the existence of technology furthering and things like that, I think people are more interested in having answers, possibly. I mean, and I feel like back in the day, you could make a movie where people would kind of fill in the blanks with their imagination, or you could kind of fill in the blanks with, discussion with your friends, or oh, maybe it was this, or maybe it was that. But nowadays, I think people really want information more like spoon fed, if you will, than to really be creative about it. And I think that that's a large thing, a large change that's happened, because really the 90s, not necessarily as much in horror, but even in regular cinema, I think that's when we really got into like the psychological aspects of things. You had those movies like Seven coming out, and I mean, they're just a plethora of movies. I mean, where it really got psychological. The story got a lot more depth to it. Usual Suspects, for example, there's another great example.
The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist. And like that, he's gone.
And you guys both know I've always enjoyed more of a psychological thriller, per se, more so than maybe just a blood and guts stab.
You must have loved the 90s. It was a good time for you.
I really did.
The 90s were great. So next, I would say, is elevated horror helping the genre or hurting it? I think that like anything, it's a matter of if it's done right. And I think that we've seen some examples of that recently, and some examples that where it's done wrong, quite honestly. So do you think horror can still be meaningful while staying entertaining?
Yes. Like Silence of the Lambs.
And you think you can dissect me with this blunt little tool?
Like, I feel like it was so meaningful, and it's like a classic, and it was very psychological, but it was still like very entertaining. It was still very, and then one recently, I remember us watching that, and at the end, and it's like, wait, I like the ones where you have to kind of think about it.
Yeah.
And it kind of, you're like, that made you think afterwards.
Was it Never Let Go? That movie was great because it was kind of I sort of like those movies too. And that one was one of those ones where the whole movie, I'm just trying to figure out, like, is this real or is she crazy?
Uh-huh.
And I like that. I like, not really knowing, and they really kind of leave it open. Like, is this really happening?
And I've not seen the particular one you guys are talking about, but I remember like Gothica, for example, another Halle Berry movie that I thought was pretty decent. I don't know if it's so much old school horror versus new school horror, but you definitely see like the whole jump scare thing. I think that's kind of gone to the wayside a little bit, or at least it's deemed as lazy nowadays. Although every once in a while, people like a good jump scare here or there, but you can't subsist on that alone in horror movies. Like Jake saying nowadays, they want a story. So where before you would have kind of almost like a flatline effect in some of these older movies, and then you'd have spikes of horror. Nowadays, I think it's more of that kind of slow, if you want to call it like a slow burn, or just a gathering of information as you go to reach a certain climactic point, which may end up leveling back out and then taking off again.
It's almost like anxiety driven, if you will, I think is sort of maybe a good way to put it. I'm not going to lie, man. And you guys have heard me say this, and I know that it's not the popular opinion, and I know that I'm a little off sometimes, or not off, but a little bit differing than a lot of horror fans. But I always have been, and probably always will be, a fan of a good jump scare. I like a good jump scare. I like that moment in a movie where you're just like, holy fuck, what was that? Like, I mean, it's fun. It wakes you up a little bit. It keeps you excited. keeps you kind of on the edge of your seat a little bit, wondering when it's going to happen or what's going to happen,
Right.
And watching a movie with Liza with the jump scares is absolutely amazing because she just you just have no idea what kind of reaction she's going to have.
Came forward.
I mean, it's hilarious. But do you guys feel like audiences have gotten burned out on trauma heavy horror, or do you think maybe the trauma, the type of trauma has changed?
I think as long as the angle is kind of intricate or maybe inventive in some way, it is not the same old thing over and over again. Talk to Me, for example. It was a kind of a decent. There were some traumatic scenes within that movie, and in reality, the whole movie was a giant trauma, film.
Dude,
If you think about it,
that part in that movie where that kid just starts bashing his
smacking
own
his
head
face
in.
off the that was a
Holy
lot.
shit.
I mean,
That
when you're
was an
watching
intense
something and
moment.
you like don't want to watch anymore because of how it's making you feel, the movie's doing something right. And that definitely was one of the more uncomfortable scenes I've ever watched before.
I thought it was uncomfortable in a very fantastic way,
Oh, it
quite
was.
honestly. I mean, I was captivated. I mean, I was just I couldn't believe what I was watching. I thought that was an amazing scene. I mean, and they just, that was wild. That was a wild scene, man.
Mhm.
So, old school horror felt raw, I think. There's something about old horror movies that just feels different. Movies like Texas Chainsaw, Halloween Thing, Hellraiser. They felt grimy, uncomfortable, sweaty, and almost dangerous. And part of that may honestly come from limitations. Older horror relied heavy on practical effects, leading camera tricks, atmosphere, and imagination. Modern horror has cleaner cinematography, smoother editing, bigger budgets for sure, and better technology. Visually, a lot of modern horror is quite beautiful a lot of times, but some fans think that polish removes some of the fear. And honestly, I can see both arguments because modern horror can look incredible, but old horror feels more real. So, why do old horror movies feel more authentic, do you think? Or do you think they feel more authentic? And if so,
You want to stab at this one?
I think new horror movies, it seems like almost every horror movie that I've watched recently, I could see that being real life or some type of it could happen, or even if it's far fetched, it's you feel like that is almost in the real world. Old school movies feels more like fantasy almost.
really? That's funny because I would actually argue that I almost feel exactly the opposite. I was literally watching the original Texas Chainsaw again last night because I just throw that on sometimes when I'm playing on my phone at night just as some background noise.
Just some things you gotta do.
I was thinking about it last night actually, and I was like, something about the way that they filmed the older horror movies like that, where it is that grittier, grimier feel. I feel like that's more realistic to me. Almost like it almost reminds me of old home videos or something like that.
Realistic, yes, but relatable, maybe not so much. I know when I watch an old horror movie, more times than not, it's one I've watched multiple times, and therefore, you do a movie 10 times, it kind of loses its luster when it comes to comedy or horror or whatever, but it doesn't mean it's any less compelling to sit down and watch. There's enough time in between the last viewing, but it almost feels more historical. Like one of the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies. I mean, we're going on 50 years, right?
Yeah.
Or very close to it. So that almost feels more like a history lesson in horror than watching some of the newer movies, whether they be good or bad. Like what was one of them? It Follows. Not a great movie in my opinion.
It Follows. I thought that was great. I would put
it was
that as
good.
I would put it in my more recent top 50 maybe.
But it's a movie that I can kind of draw parallels to. My point is that it feels here and now. It feels like it's in the moment where this could actually be happening. You could walk outside your door and this is something that's going on in today's day and age, versus some of the old school horror stuff feels a little bit disconnected because of the time gap that there has been. I don't know if that makes sense, the way I'm wording it, but
No, I think
That's what I was saying.
I think you do make sense. I think I'm just a really nostalgic guy. sometimes. And I think like when I watch something like Friday the 13th, it like reminds me of back in the day when I used to go to like summer camp and stuff like that. And I don't know, maybe to me, I'm a little more connected to some of those things possibly. But I mean, to me, it feels, but I do also agree with, I think what Liza said, that I do feel like there was more imagination kind of involved. And I think this also hits on your point, Steve, where it's like these days life is crazy. I mean, there's just crazy shit going on around us all the time. And I do feel like, It Follows or something like that. It does feel a lot more possible. But I also think that, when Liza said imagination, I think that that's what I'm kind of getting at with the creativity. Because I mean, how many of us, and I think even the three of us probably have sat around and been like, well, what would you do if you were, being chased by Leatherface or if you were in that situation and I think that that was a lot of the fun in horror was not necessarily that it was completely realistic, but that it was close enough that you could imagine yourself in that scenario. And I think that's why a lot of people like it, is to imagine what would you do? How would you survive that? What would you do if Jason was after you?
And I would say that almost every horror movie I've ever seen from 40, 50, 60 years ago, I think I'd have no problem surviving any one of those circumstances and situations versus today's horror feels a little bit more raw and kind of untethered in the fact that in order to make a good movie, you can pay homage, if you will, to a certain style of horror, but you've got to come up with something fresh and new, and accompany that with 2026. Like I said, you could open the door and walk outside and feel like that could be happening in real time based off of just the newness of these movies. So to me, they feel a little more realistic, whether they are truly a realistic type of movie or not. They feel more realistic. And I think that goes a long way to helping them along, especially if they don't have a fantastic plot.
Yeah. I definitely see where you're coming from. I mean, I think that this is a subject for sure that I'm definitely kind of torn down the middle on because I'm a huge advocate and lover of classic horror and old school horror. And I do like a lot of what's happening now, but I've also got reservations. And that brings up the next question that I have for you guys. And this is kind of a little bit of a two-parter here, but are practical effects inherently scarier, do you think? Or do you think CGI has improved horror or hurt it?
Well, I think it's improved because I'll tell you that one scene in Lord of the Rings where Bilbo has those eye things, and they do it sometimes in horror too. That's the creepiest stuff I've ever seen. Like that creeps me out so bad.
I'm literally gonna have to look up what you're talking about because I haven't seen Lord of the Rings enough to know what the eye things are.
When he's showing him the mithril and then he sees the ring, I'll send it to you.
Yeah,
but that's really creepy.
I'm going to include it in the video because I think we all need to know what you're talking about because those of us who haven't seen Lord of the Rings a million times, I mean, it puts me to sleep. So,
yeah, it's been a while, man. It's been a while since I've sat down and watched those. I mean, they're great films, but I think you can get away with being too CGI reliant. And I see that a lot in action movies.
Like Transformers.
I'm changing sides. Cool warrior goddess. Name's Wheelie. Yeah. Say my name.
What are you allowing to happen to your foot just then?
My God, dude. Transformers. Some of the Transformer movies that have come out in the last 10, 15 years have been unwatchable. They're super multi-million-dollar blockbusters. They got zero plot, shit story, and they rely on the wow factor that
I think that particular series, I think, makes a lot of money just off of the particular fandom is what I think that is.
Well, I don't know necessarily if it is CGI. But okay, you remember in From Hell when it's actually the same actor, Ian Holmes. His eyes like go black. You know what I'm talking about?
Well, yeah, okay. I know who you're talking about, and I know who. Yeah, Bilbo Baggins and.
No,
yeah,
it's not the same actor. I'm sorry. Wait,
it's not.
It's not. Never mind.
You're sure?
I'm sorry. I don't remember.
Okay. I mean, I was totally on board there with you because I really
maybe
believe
it is.
that.
Wait, is it?
Holy
yes,
shit.
I think it is.
You got me all fucked up now. Is it or is it not the same actor?
I'm afraid it was the Mormons. Yes, the Mormons were the correct answer.
I feel more embarrassed because I love Lord of the Rings. But those types of things, I don't know if it is CGI or if it's contacts or what it is. But that type of like subtle, I don't know if it's CGI, but that type of like subtle shift in like horror villains or different types of things. It's one thing to like see their face and it's scary. But when you see like these subtle shifts of like a scene, that to me is very scary. So I don't know necessarily if that would be CGI or if it would just be lighting or makeup or
Well, I
contacts
think
or
that would
whatnot.
depend on the scene of the movie you're speaking about, and in those particular scenes, I would imagine. And that's the thing is that when those movies were made, it was probably a lot cheaper to get contacts. These days, I would imagine CGI and special effects are probably fairly cheap to just be like, "Hey, can you turn my eyes black?" You know. I mean, yeah, I don't know. These days, it's probably CGI is probably cheaper in a lot of ways because of the advancements of AI and things like that. But I mean, realistically, though, I guess what I'm trying to think of here, or trying to say is like, I don't know. I mean, it's sort of, I think it's almost like a lost art a little bit in a lot of cases because when you think about the old school movies like Dawn of the Dead, a lot of the movies that really relied heavy on the practical effects. I mean, I think some of that stuff was really cool. And these days, I don't like when it looks too computer generated. And,
Right.
I mean, I think even back when Jen was on here, she even described or said that her favorites were usually the ones that kind of were like 50-50,
Mhm.
kind of giving the practical effects and then maybe just kind of like juicing them up a little bit with the CGI.
Yeah,
There's
I
definitely something to
agree.
be said about creating a visual effect without, I don't want to call it cheating, but without the assistance of CGI. I mean, if you go back into the 70s, 80s, 60s for that matter, and you wanted to decapitate somebody, or you wanted their head to blow up, or you wanted something else, I mean, how many times did they try with different things to create an effect and fail until they finally got it right? And they're like, man, this is pretty good. There's something to be said about putting the effort in and the time into trying to create something like that and it paying off, either well or not well based upon how good of a job you did. But some of those special effects that were created just by sheer thought and like how we figure this out, how do we make that happen, when the head splats, how are we going to make the noise, are we going to throw a pumpkin on the ground, are we going to do just like weird things like that? It's really kind of cool to think, and I think it would have been an awesome job to have way back then, although I'm sure in a lot of ways nowadays there's still very similar applications on how to come up with those types of ideas and apply them in cinema. But that'd be pretty cool, and I think there's something to be said about creating an effect that really stands the test of time when you can't rely on CGI or AI, like you're saying.
Well, I think that Tom Savini, probably, in my opinion, is one of the best at that. One of the most amazing practical effects guys and makeup guys. Yeah, I mean, it's too bad though because in a lot of ways, it's like it's great that we've built the way that we have, and a lot of things have a progression or an evolution. But at the same time, I mean, are we finding a new way to create art, or is it killing the art? I mean, and I think that that's the discussion a lot in a lot of art forms. With the advancement of AI and stuff, is kind of
Mhm.
like you know. But at the same time, you still are going to have directors and writers and actors and producers that are more interested in. And I think that's going to eventually come back full circle, just like everything does. And I think that people are going to eventually be like, no, we're only making movies with, practical effects. And, everything's got its trends and the trends come back and forth. So, I mean, I'm interested and excited to see kind of how that goes in the future. If we see the resurgence of practical effects after we run out of enjoyment with AI, I guess, or CGI. But anyway, has modern horror become too serious? This is where horror fans really start fighting because older horror often embraced camp, ridiculous concepts, over the top kills, and absurdity. Modern horror sometimes feels emotionally exhausting. And again, that's not necessarily bad. Movies like Hereditary, The Night House, and Saint Maud stick with people emotionally in a very different way than slashers do. But there are also horror fans saying, can somebody just make a fun horror movie again? And honestly, that's probably part of why movies like Terrifier, Final Destination, and Weapons are getting so much attention. People are craving loud horror again. So, what I'm asking you guys, and I would say I would say that I've got a pretty strong opinion on this, but do you guys think that horror has lost some of its fun? Like kind of overall, like as a genre, would you say that it's kind of lost some of its fun?
Yes, I think sorry, but yes,
Yes.
I think there's a lot of horror movies that have become very pretentious, and a lot of the people that watch them have that kind of pretentious, like, kind of thing about it, and it can be really, like, kind of, like, take away from that movie and kinda, like
Damn, I
Yeah.
mean, Steve's right in the room. Shit.
So I don't know. An old school horror movie was made for what purpose, what reason? And that's just the rhetorical question. But why do you make the first Chainsaw Massacre? Why do you make the first Friday the 13th or whatever else? And nowadays you're probably making. You were making a movie to fail before, but you were making a movie to put your art form out on display, like Jake said. Nowadays, I think that movies are driven so much by the financial ramifications. We've got to make something that's not going to break the piggy bank. We got to make sure that we follow certain rules or guidelines that are going to make this enjoyable for people to watch, so we can push it. At least that's my opinion. In order to do that, you have to try to come up with new, fresh ideas and or steal from the old school stuff. And I guess there's a time and place for both. But for me, I feel that maybe old school horror movies might have been a little less encumbered, where newer horror movies might put 20 people in a room and really have people analyze it and break it down and say, what do you think about that? Well, that didn't seem like that was a good idea, or this was not realistic, or maybe we should do that, or this is going to offend somebody. And I don't know if this is all true, but it's at least my opinion on it. So I feel that there might be more shackles or handcuffs on today's horror, in a way, metaphorically, because obviously there's still the opportunity or the ability for people to showcase what they can do. And every once in a while you hit a real home run with some of this stuff. But I feel that they play it safe a little more often than maybe they used to in the original old school horror stuff.
I would say mainstream, you're probably right about that. I would say that you do have the ones that sort of break the rules. Like, I mean, and I know how you guys feel about it, but, like Terrifier, I think Terrifier is like kind of fuck anything appropriate,
Mm-hmm.
which
There's
I like
definitely.
because I've always liked I've always kind of liked that. I've always kind of liked the sort of, anarchy approach to, artwork and art forms and horror. And I would actually say that I absolutely, and not all the way across the board, but I would say that for the most part, I think that a lot of horror has lost fun. And I agree with Liza on that completely, because even now when I watch horror movies, I a lot of times put on the classics, or I am, going through Tubi or Netflix or whatever for 45 minutes or an hour reading all of them, because I'm looking for just like a simple horror plot that's just fun and to the point. And, six friends are camping when they come across a crazy clown in the woods, who broke out of a mental institution and wants to kill them all. Like, okay, that sounds great. Because it's simple to the point and fun for me, and I do like some of the more dramatic, thought provoking and deep horror movies. But I do agree with, and I think one of the things that we've kind of said is in the dialogue here is exhausting. Sometimes to me it's a little exhausting. It's a little much.
Mhm.
Sometimes I watch a horror movie and I'm just like, man, I need a nap, or I need to like just like
Do you
it's
do you think it loses some of its fun per se by being a little too um, uh, like informed, like trying to give you backstories, trying to fill in the gaps all the way instead of just letting you take your hands off the wheel and just enjoy the movie for what it is?
Sometimes, yeah, because I mean, for me, when I watch a horror movie, it's kind of like I would say for me, it's almost like the same thing as like getting on a roller coaster. Like, I want to have a good time. I want to, enjoy it. I want to get excited. I want to woo. It's almost like for me, it's horror has always been a way for me to kind of unwind a little bit. It's always been a way for me to kind of just like free my mind a little bit and just sort of go with the flow. And some of these movies have become so heavy and so dramatic and so twist driven and plot driven and everything else, that to me sometimes, like I said, I mean, it's almost like I need a break. It's like I need a break from the thing I usually use to take a break. I mean, but that's just the way I see it.
I've got kind of a weird analogy too about horror, and probably the best analogy would be Cabin in the Woods.
Yes, you did. Yes, you had zombies. But this is zombie redneck torture family, see? They're entirely separate species. Like the difference between an elephant and an elephant seal. Thank you. Well, there's always next year.
I don't think I've seen one since then where I could sit back and it's almost like putting a pill for a dog inside some hamburger. You know what you're trying to get to, but let's make it enjoyable in getting there. For me, when I first watched that movie right out of the gate, I had no idea what it was going to be like or what it was about. And quite honestly, I've never been a huge fan of equal parts comedy and horror. I felt that they were kind of two segregated styles of cinema that really don't blend well together.
I love a good comedy horror.
Unless you
comedy.
really hit a home run with it.
We have a winner!
As I don't think, but in a lot of ways, I mean, comedy movies fail that way. Action movies fail that way, trying to be too much of one or the other. But to be able to marry comedy and horror together in a fashion that is not boring or ridiculous is pretty cool. And even though I'm not a huge Terrifier fan, I don't think I've seen a whole. I understand that movie is, or that's new series is kind of the next level or the next step in that kind of evolution of just, kind of silly, goofy comedy and horror at the same time. But I don't know. That's a tough one for me to think.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I definitely think the older movies are more fun. I usually go to those for my intake of fun when it comes to horror. I mean, do you guys feel like modern horror has become emotionally heavy? I think is the best way to put it. Like maybe it's relying too much on kind of, because I almost feel like emotional horror or horror emotion is a new phrase we could make up here, where it's like they're almost just trying to have you invest in something to the point where it feels devastating or drastic when you're watching it.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of taking you over that way instead of, just letting you see the gore happen, if you will.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I mean, after a movie, you want to go, man, that was awesome. That was a lot of fun. That was a great movie or something. But nowadays it's more like they're trying to elicit some sort of shock and awe campaign on you to afterwards. You're like, man, what did I just watch? Like the movie that we talked about not too long ago with the first person kind of walking through the woods whole thing. It had some,
my God,
it had some cool elements of old school horror, but it just was a dredge fest. I mean, it was just a lot.
That was what the hell was the name of that one?
God, I know it was In a Violent Nature.
In a Violent Nature. You know what was the weirdest thing about that movie is that movie had me literally on both spectrums at a different point. And I don't know if you felt the same way, but I loved it. And then I fucking hated it. And it was like, I don't know how that movie did that to me, but it was like, I started watching it and I was like, oh man, this is kind of cool. This is different. Like I could get into this. And then it literally hit like every fucking horror movie trope and just went downhill and became too much. And all of a sudden, just like the guy walking for what felt like miles at a time became less cute and more daunting.
Right.
To watch. And,
that would have made one of the best short story horror films of all time. If they turned that into 20 minutes or 25 minutes, that could have been fantastic.
That shit needed the Jake edit, just like I did on that other video that we reviewed where I cut that bitch down to about 35 valuable seconds.
Right.
They need to bring me in for editing, man, because I'll cut out all that shit. I'll give you a 5-minute banger instead of a 2-hour fucking
sludge fest.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I could have made that thing. I could have made that thing like the best thing you ever saw at an independent film festival.
Yeah, and I get what you're saying because there were some parts in it that, I mean, that shock value is what drew you in to be compelled to want to watch it to start with, and then once they hook you, I mean, where are you going? They got your money, so it's one of those things that it did its job, but it's not going to be talked about like the Mount Rushmore horror movies moving forward, but it did what it was trying to do.
Fuck, dude, I couldn't remember the name. I was having a hard time thinking of the name, honestly, because it was just so forgettable. What is more memorable to you in watching horror? Is it more emotional or more entertaining? And I think this is kind of an interesting question because, for example, kind of talking about some of the newer movies like Talk to Me or maybe It Follows. Some of these movies that are dry do bring you in a little more emotionally. Do you think that those are more memorable than just like, I don't know, for example, for me, like Jason slamming the chick up against the tree in the sleeping bag? I mean, what do you think grabs your attention or your long term, I guess fondness, you know?
I definitely want some entertainment. If I wanna be emotional about something, I'll watch Pride and Prejudice, but I really do like the entertainment value of it. That's what I really enjoy about horror.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying it couldn't have a good plot. I mean, I'm just
Mhm.
saying like, let's not make it all plot driven and
Right. And if it's a heavy story, if it's got a heavy emotionally driven story to it, then there's only certain times that you're willing to want to watch that and to invest in something like that. Where 9 times out of 10, I think people just want to come home from work, take their shoes off, kick back on the couch and just be lazy and just soak in whatever they're watching and not have to think about it, not have to get in their emotions or dig deep and discern what is being done. They just want to be kind of spoon fed and entertained. And
I agree 100%.
the
And that's
old school
exactly how I
movies,
feel.
I think, do that better than the new ones do, if that's what you're going
Absolutely.
for.
Absolutely. And I agree with that. And I think maybe it might have something to do with all of our ages. I mean, it does feel like the newer generation does kind of like to see these more thought provoking ones. But, bringing up In a Violent Nature brings me to like, where are the new horror icons? Old school horror created larger than life villains. We got Freddy, Jason, Michael, Chucky, Leatherface, Pinhead. They became pop culture icons. Modern horror feels different. Today, the focus is often atmosphere, concepts, emotional themes, or psychological dread. And because of that, we haven't gotten many universally iconic horror villains recently. Now, to be fair, there are modern standouts: Art the Clown, The Grabber, maybe some characters from Smile or Barbarian. But are they truly on the level of the classics? That's a really interesting debate because maybe horror itself changed. Maybe modern horror is less interested in mascots and more interested in experience. So, my next question to you guys is, why don't modern horror villains become icons as easily?
I think sometimes it's a lot of it is about the main character more. You see the main character more, I guess.
Like, do you think maybe maybe what you're trying to say is, do you feel like maybe the focus is more on almost like the final girl or that's a really
Yeah,
interesting take.
and or just the like. I think what Liza's getting at is the main character itself. I mean, do you want to watch Kane Hodder in whatever he's doing versus I would equate it maybe to like Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone. I mean, those two guys were action. That's I mean, if an action film came out and one of those two guys was in it, you damn near didn't even have to know the plot or really care. You were willing to, if you were fans of them, you were willing to fire that movie up and watch it because of what they bring to the table and what they've done in the past. And it's the same for Freddy or Jason or any of these other characters that have been in a dozen movies. I don't know if you can continue to keep people's attention like you could back then with something like that, because we become so much as a society caught up in the moment and needing instant gratification for things that if it's not new and if it's not fresh, are we willing to go back to the well and take a chance on something for the sake of an individual? And I don't think, like you said, I mean, Grabber's been in 2 movies. And the second one, even though it was a great movie, didn't really even need to be made. In fact, I don't think they were even going to make it. And then Terrifiers had what, 4, if you want to say 4?
We're getting to 4. Well,
Yeah.
we're going to be getting to 5 technically if you want to count All Hallows Eve, which most people don't.
Yeah. But just the same, he's probably the only character nowadays that has gotten his roll called more than once or twice. So there's really nobody that I can think of nowadays that, where do you go from there?
And that's the interesting part right there, is that there's nobody that you can think of. And I wanted to bring that in here because I have one that I personally love it, but nobody, it's like it happened. And even a lot of people in the horror community got into it and then like moved on. And it's like, is it because of the time and place? Because the one I'm trying to get to here is Victor Crowley, Hatchet. Now, I
Mhm.
think that those are great movies, and I think that they really, really work well with that horror with the comedic edge. And I love those movies, and I think that he in my opinion, is the best example of a more modern day horror icon. But for whatever reason, I don't feel like it took. And that's what I'm sort of wondering right now, is why do you think that is? Do you think that's just because the audience is different? Do you think it's because of a time and place, or I mean, because he had every reason to make it, in my opinion.
Right. I mean, I feel that he's still more old school than new school, as far as from an actor's perspective. 'Cause he's been around since the 80s, right? So
Victor Crowley, or
yeah,
you
or
mean,
just Kane Hodder
or
in general.
Kane Hodder?
Yeah. So you can take, because if you want to take a name and not necessarily a character, like Victor Crowley versus Jason, right? Didn't he play him as well?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you want to take a actor versus an actual character within a movie franchise, you could take like Justin Long as being, the face of horror from a male's perspective, and fill in the blank for some of the females. Probably what's her face there has been
Mia Goth.
Mia Goth is kind of the up and comer, but they don't have to go out and do the same performance each movie, playing the same character, the same type of thing. And so I think people want fresh and new, even though they might want the same face, they want a different version of it. And so to come back with the same, Freddy Krueger, for example, I don't think people want that anymore. I think our attention span is far too small, and we're not willing to accept that anymore.
Well, they are continuing with the series. They're going to be doing a Friday the 13th series. I believe, if I read that correctly, that it's going to take place like 9 months after Jason drowned, I think. It's going to go back to that time period. And then they're also going to be working on a Texas Chainsaw series where they're going to be discussing, well, in that one, I think they're going to focus more on the family. And from my understanding, I think that they're already working on or have worked on, I don't have all the streaming services, and I've never really been a huge fan, but I think they are doing something with Nightmare on Elm Street because
DJ Quayles is not a Freddy Krueger.
Well,
I mean,
I was reading, because I read a lot of the horror news, that I believe Robert Englund said that he was going to sign on for one more project. And I'm not sure what that is or where that's coming. That was something that I read a little while back now. But Victor Crowley, though, I feel like what they were doing there was they were trying to bring the slasher modern, and they gave a lot of nods and throwbacks to the classics. And I feel like they were trying to sort of bridge the gap and make that new generation. And like I said, I just don't feel like it took. I really enjoyed it. I felt like it was incredible. In my opinion, I mean, it had that movie. It also guest starred Robert Englund was in it.
I think there's a need for these movies.
Kane Hodder played Victor Crowley. You had even Tony Todd made an appearance in those movies.
He slipped, hit his head right on the roof, and sued me for negligence. That cocksucker.
I mean, you so you had all these nods.
It's kind of fun to see all the old ghouls together, Candyman and Jason and Freddy.
To
those movies, horror. Jake, still felt like it was straight out of the early 90s. Like it didn't feel like a modern take on horror. And I think that's maybe why I wouldn't say it failed, but why it didn't take and get the traction maybe that you thought it deserved or that character deserved.
I really do.
Because it feels like something out of the 80s to me, that those movies, even though they were relatively new, early 2000s or 2010s, if I remember correctly. So
yeah. Well, you're probably right, and that's probably why. It's just disappointing to me. So would you say that as of right now, if you had to be like, yes, that's the closest thing we have, would you say Art the Clown is the closest to a modern equivalent of a slasher?
I would.
Do you think that part of the issue, or what's your opinion on, do you feel like horror today kind of focuses more on concepts rather than characters? Do you think that has something to do with sort of why we're more kind of stepping away from that, 20 sequel franchise slasher? Is that we're more concept based?
The ones that I like main characters more as opposed to like the villains. Like, for example, like Sinners, or some horror movies with like Samara Weaving in it, like Mia Goth. Like, I like not necessarily like the villains of the show. Yeah, that was good. with Mia Goth. I thought that was really good.
Those were interesting movies. We need to really kind of discuss those at some point because I'm not even sure how I feel about those right off the top of my head. But those definitely need a discussion at some point.
Yeah. But so I feel like it does, like, I feel like in modern movies, it's like you have to kind of have like some kind of like character that you really like, or even like with the villains, like Bill Skarsgård and stuff, like he seems to like play, but he seems to play more like classic horror villains.
But he's very what I like too is I like that with him and Justin Long is I like horror actors that don't play the same thing over and over again and kind of like
Yeah.
what Steve just said, Kane Hodder sort of is the same kind of thing all the time. And like I love the trend, like for example, the juxtaposition of Bill Skarsgård in It versus Barbarian. Like I really like that he does so many different things. And even recently, that movie that he did with Anthony Hopkins that we watched, where he's locked in the car there. I mean, he's doing really interesting things in horror where he plays different roles, and I like that. I like the fact that he works on not being typecasted. And Justin Long is Justin Long, but he also, he's played like the nice guy, and he's played like the dickhead. He's a lot better at being the dickhead, but Drag Me to Hell, for example, he's like the nice supportive boyfriend. Jeepers Creepers, he's like the naive kind of snot-nosed brother, but he's not necessarily a bad guy. And then in Barbarian, he's a complete cocksucker. So, I mean, you really have that juxtaposition even with him as far as what kind of, and then Tusk, of course, I mean, he's a complete jerk in that and kind of, I wouldn't say he deserves what he gets, but I mean,
I hate that movie.
he didn't help the situation any. Tusk is great.
It's so creepy. I hate that movie.
Tusk is great. And that's actually a great place to turn into this next topic I have here is modern horror is getting weird again in some ways. One thing I will say about modern horror, it's getting weird again. And honestly, I love that. Right now, horror is exploding with body horror, cosmic horror, weird girl horror, surreal horror, echo horror, psychological breakdown horror, claustrophobic survival horror. And while some people think modern horror is becoming too artsy, other people think this is one of the most creative eras the genre has ever had. Because some modern horror feels incredibly original, while some of it absolutely disappears into its own symbolism. I would say, for examples of that, would be for me like Hereditary, Midsummer, things like that. But that's just me. I'm not really into those kinds of movies. But what do you think? And why do you think body horror is becoming so prevalent right now? And Tusk kind of brings us right into that. The Substance, for example, great body horror. We've been seeing a lot more body horror, I think, coming on. What do you guys think is the fascination with that in modern times?
I don't like those movies. I think they creep me out.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're just a caveat within horror that has been least explored in history. So as you were kind of talking about that, Jake, I was thinking, is horror more mainstream now than it used to be? Is it when I was a kid or when I was watching horror in my teens or whatever else, it was kind of like a Friday night get together with your friends or a Saturday weekend thing. Nowadays, it feels like you can come home at 6 o'clock on a Tuesday and watch horror. It's just like it has become a little more of a mainstream type of thing. And I think that's youth driven in reality. Like Elizabeth, my middle daughter, she's in her mid-20s. I mean, she's watched a lot of friggin' horror movies, man.
Oh, yeah,
And
she's
like,
been on here
God
with me.
dang.
We just had an episode a couple months back talking about
So
what we thought would be good.
and I can kind of get reading the room when I'm around her and talking to some of her friends that she hangs out with too. It has become a more common place in cinema. I think it's been wasn't so taboo as it was back in the 60s or 70s. It didn't have to have a time and a place. Now, anytime, anywhere is okay. And so I think that plays a big role.
When I was a kid, I had a couple friends who we loved horror, and we used to stay up late and we'd watch Alfred Hitchcock movies, and we'd pop on like the Misfits, and we'd read our little comic books, like the horror comic books, Creep Show, things like that, the Tales from the Crypt. I mean, it was definitely a lot more of I think it was more something that you were either in that club or you weren't. You were in that group or you weren't.
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays, you walk around and you see all sorts of people wearing like Child's Play Chucky t-shirts. Half of them probably don't even know who the hell he is, but it's just, it's become such pop culture, I guess is what I'm kind of getting at.
Yeah. Well, also, like, when you watch, because I just recently watched the Oscars, and I mean, Sinners, Weapons,
How many awards did
Frankenstein.
Sinners win?
Yeah,
All
and
of them?
it won, and Michael B. Jordan won Best Actor, and then the woman in Weapons won the Best Actress award, and Frankenstein won. I think they won one or a couple of them.
Frankenstein should have won more. That movie was
It was
fantastic.
incredible. Yeah. So it just, you do really have these incredible movies. And I guess thinking now you do have a lot of emotions with these movies, but the ones that do have the emotions also come with the entertainment. It's not that kind of draining emotion that comes with a lot of like that just trauma, like pretentious horror movies that you have that kind of are it seems like a lot of those horror movies that are coming out, but the ones that are good and entertaining and that do have that emotional aspect are the ones that do really well, I believe.
Let me ask you a question, because that's a great point you just brought up. Frankenstein. We have seen multiple Frankensteins. That movie has withstood the test of times. There have been probably a dozen mainstream versions of Frankenstein. Would you guys argue that the storyline would you argue that the storyline has become more emotional, more heavy, as it's gone through the years, through the evolution?
I think so. I mean, because you have something every time you make a new movie, you have something more to compare it to. So when you make the very first Frankenstein movie ever, I mean, you got a blank canvas, right? And so you make the second one, the third one, the 15th one, you've got something to play off of, but you need to make it unique and you need to make it
Add details.
exactly. And
Yeah.
that's why
That
I
makes a
love
lot of
this new
sense.
one so much. Is it had so much tasty stuff in there that, I mean, it followed suit, and you definitely knew what you were watching, but had a fantastic take on it. And like I said, I thought it appeared to me as though it was, and I made this reference before, like with Titanic. Like the movie or not, that's irrelevant. You can, if you had eyes, you could see how much effort went into costume and into period piece, if you will. And
Well,
that's
the details were astounding for that
unbelievable.
movie.
And I think a lot of times that gets overlooked or pushed aside for using that budget for other things. Like, oh, we'll just CGI it, or we'll just AI it, or we'll just kind of do all of that and focus more heavily on this. Where the old school directors and things really put a lot of emphasis on realism and period, both clothing and verbiage. When you're watching something that took place in the 1800s versus something that took place yesterday. And the closer you can get to replicating that goes a long way to making that movie good or bad. And so when you do it right and you put the effort and time in, it pays dividends for sure.
Now, these are two totally different movies, and this is a little bit of a side quest here for me, but I'm just curious as to what you guys think and if you're on the same page as me. But just as a film, we're talking about the awards. As a film, overall, everything, best film, Sinners is up against Frankenstein. Who are you guys going for?
That's a hard question because I felt so, I don't know, because Sinners was just so, it was so beautiful and emotional to me, but yet so was Frankenstein. So that would be a really tough question because I love both of those movies.
You got to pick, man. I mean, you're on the board. I'm asking you, like, you're on the board of voters, whatever that is, for the Oscars, and we got to pick a winner.
Well, after I watched Sinners, I listened to that album for like a week after, and I just wanted to relive that movie. But then I really love Frank. I don't know. That's a hard question.
Steve, you got an answer?
I'll answer. Loved both the movies. In fact, going into both of them, I was skeptical for both of them to be as good as what the hype was. And the funny thing is our friend Sean was the one that really turned me on to watching Frankenstein. It's like, you got to see this movie, man. And I had seen a couple of clips and I was like, I don't know, maybe. It just kind of feels like a regurgitation of several other things that I've seen. Kind of felt a little bit Lord of the Rings, but God bless America, the White Walkers and all that other crap there.
Game of Thrones.
Game of Thrones, yeah. I mean, it felt familiar. I guess we'll put it that way. Not after watching it. It definitely had its own uniqueness and take on things, but just the quick trailer, if you will, felt too familiar to me to be super entertaining. Where a movie like Sinners, going into it, you really don't have a clue what it's about. I mean, you got an idea of what's going on, but you really don't know until you know. And at that point in time, does it carry the same value, even though it's a fantastic movie and it really did have some great stuff? It's almost like Signs for Shyamalan. You know, you watch a movie like that or The Sixth Sense or something. The first time you watch it, you're like, wow, this thing is amazing. But are you going to sit down and watch it again with the same feeling that you had the first time you watched it? I don't think you can with a movie like Sinners versus a movie like Frankenstein, where I could probably, after the credits roll at the end, literally start it right back over again and be just as taken in by it as I was in the first watch. Where with Sinners, although it was a fantastic movie, and I'm not besmirching it in any way, it was a great movie and some great acting. I feel that it, on repeat watches, it will lose a little bit of its luster each time.
Stay the fuck away from me.
I don't know, that end scene with I was smoking Annie. I can't. That scene makes me so emotional every time. I can't handle watching that scene.
All right, I'm going to break the tie. Frankenstein. Frankenstein takes it. Liza picks Sinners, obviously. She didn't want to.
No,
but
I
you don't want to pick at all.
I don't want to pick because I feel like both of those movies. I just don't know. Both
I mean,
of those movies are just
I'm not going to sit here
good.
and act like Frankenstein is just a hands down winner. I mean, it is tough. I mean, those are tough movies to put up against one another. They truly are. But in the end, there was just something about Frankenstein to me that just was,
Yeah.
I don't know. I would say that just the way it was filmed, the cinematography, the acting, everything, it was just sort of like an epic film to me, honestly. I mean, I would put it up there as one of those kinds of films. You know, almost I would put it on the same as like Bram Stoker's Dracula. You know, with Gary Oldman. I mean, to me, that's just like a classic. It's got its own vibe. It's just, to me, I would probably put it in that same category of just something that I'll always love and remember.
True. Yeah, the cinematography I agree, was really amazing with that movie.
And it wasn't Sinners too. I mean, Sinners is a great movie. I'm not knocking Sinners. I'm just saying that for me, Frankenstein would take it. Which maybe that's what we need to do because we do our big March Madness every year. So maybe next year we'll go into some of these face-offs of some of these modern movies and kind of see what the best modern horror movie is. I'll work something like that up. That'll be fun.
I don't know if you have it in front of you or you can pull it up real quick, but how long was Frankenstein? Because it felt more like a Lord of the Rings style of movie versus Sinners being a $1.30 type of easy watch that you could put it in. You don't have to really invest much into.
True.
I would say if I had to guess, I would say that Frankenstein was long, but I would also say
it felt like 2.5 hours to me.
But it was also kind of slow at times. So
that might have
I'll say that maybe
to...
it did seem a little bit longer.
And Jacob Elordi was still gorgeous as Frankenstein.
Yeah, Liza is like the biggest fangirl ever, and she was all over Jacob Elordi for a while there.
Love Jacob Elordi. And Michael B. Jordan is gorgeous too. So I think it just has to do with there was just two very gorgeous men in both of the movies.
Steve, 2 hours and 29 minutes. You were 1 minute off.
Wow.
That's quite interesting that you were so close. Let's
Straight
see.
Up guess. I mean, it felt long, but
Sinners was 2 hours and 17 minutes. That's only what?
I never would have guessed that. Sinners felt to me like a much quicker movie.
I thought it was like, yeah, I did too. Wow, it was 2 hours and 12 minutes?
Never would have guessed that.
17 minutes. It was 12 minutes shorter than Frankenstein.
I would have guessed an hour shorter than Frankenstein.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So I don't know what that means. What does that speak towards? To have a movie that's 2 hours and 15 minutes long feel like it was shorter? Is that a good or a bad thing?
I think there's just so much packed into that movie.
I mean I would say they're different. They're different vibes, really. I mean, it's different feels.
Yeah.
I would just say that the pacing was very different of those movies. You know, Sinners definitely had a faster pace. Frankenstein really took its time. But I think also in taking its time, it really became something special. So I don't know.
That
It's a tough one, but we're going to have to do some March Madness best new movies.
I think thinking back on it, because like one of the ending scenes in Frankenstein where Mia Goth is on that rock and she's dying and stuff, that is very similar to kind of like one of the ending scenes in Sinners. So they do have very like kind of similar
arches
aspects. Yeah, so they are just very beautiful movies. They really are.
I would say that Sinners is more of a progression of characters, where Frankenstein is more of a recollection of the past. So maybe it's a different take on how you view it. One feels a little bit more progressive, where one feels a little bit more, I don't know, recollective. That's a friggin' word.
I will say this though, that when it came to Frankenstein, I'm really glad when I watched it, I was kind of like, this dude learned way too much, way too fast, because he was like, I was studying with the old guy and all of a sudden I could speak perfect English and I could read 700-page stories in like a week. But I'm kind of glad they also did that, because that movie would have been about 8 hours long had they really put the time into what it took for him to get that educated. So I do give them credit for that, because I was like, thank you for kind of skipping a little bit ahead. I mean, yeah, it does kind of hurt the story a little bit to me, but at the same time, I'm glad I didn't have to watch 6 hours of him, learning how to read. Anyway, with that little bit of criticism, I still think Frankenstein wins. Sinners was a great movie, both fantastic. But back to where we were with that little segue behind us with Frankenstein taking the lead. If there was a current horror trend you feel like you would be happy with that stopping, what would you say that is?
Stopping a specific trend nowadays?
Yeah, like I would be happy if I never really saw that again, kind of a more of a current trend, if you will. I'll go ahead and say this while you're thinking, that I don't know if I would necessarily say it's a current trend. And I know that this is something that comes in waves. It never really goes away. It's always on the upswing or downswing of a wave. But I've had just about enough of supernatural movies for a while. I'm kind of getting a little played out with the whole, the whole exorcism / person being.
Yeah.
What's the word I'm looking for, Steve? When the ghost is inside, the demon's inside you.
Possessed.
Yeah, I'm a little over the possession. I'm a little over the possession exorcism thing for now, I think.
I would agree. There is certainly a lot of, I won't necessarily say religion. That is one of the main staples within horror, is that spiritual side of things, demons and angels or being possessed, like you say, and they have beaten that to death. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
And so when you have somebody like a Russell Crowe, who's one of our time's greatest actors, when you have to take somebody like that to be able to turn a specific exorcism style movie into anything watchable, and even then it's pedestrian at best, in my opinion, then you might need to put that down for a while, because I wouldn't have it. So I think you're right by that. And that might be the only answer as far as I'm concerned, because there is so much fertile ground elsewhere. I think that it's always nice to see new directors kind of explore that and not go back to the well too often. And that's another thing too, what I thought about is how many huge names in cinema from a 30 or 40 year catalog of these horror directors that are so iconic. And nowadays it's all these upstarts. This kid's 22 years old and you did a short film that gave him enough money to do this, and this is his first feature film. Or you get a Jordan Peele who hits a home run with his first horror movie, and then everybody is on the edge of their seat to see what he's coming out with next, which in my opinion have not been as strong as some of the original ones that he came up with.
By the way, I was doing some research for an upcoming show, and I found out why Jordan Peele hit a home run and now sucks.
Why's that?
Because I actually was doing some research today, and I came across this article talking about how Jordan Peele, for the movie Get Out, had thought about that movie for so long that when he sat down to write the script, he wrote it in like almost no time because he literally had thought out that entire movie over such a long period of time that he had every character, every scene, everything down. But think about how much thought and energy and effort he put into that over the years. And then once that came out and was such a hit, now you're going to be making something that you haven't put that kind of energy or thought or time into. And I think I think that is where Jordan Peele went wrong. I think I figured it out today. I broke the case because I always wondered that myself. I was like, Jordan Peele came out swinging. I thought that guy was going to be the next big thing. And then he wasn't, so far. And why? And I think it's because that movie came out and he put so much time into it. And then there was this pressure. And the pressure was to keep on this path that he had started. But the path that he had started was so well thought out, it was hard to stay on that path. I think that's what happened.
Yeah.
I mean, could you come up with anybody else? Obviously, there's a handful of younger, like Eli Roth, for example. I think is maybe in his early 50s or whatever. But anybody short of Shyamalan in horror that you would hang your hat on, saying this is the new guy. This is because Jordan Peele was supposed to be that person. But even though he might get more credit than I think he deserves, riding his own coattails a bit, I can't think of a whole lot of other directors that have made a big name for themselves.
Well, I think it is a little early to tell also because, for example, Liza and I just watched Bring Her Back. That was the same director that did Talk to Me. Now, Talk to Me, I think, was fantastic. I think that's one of the ones that's going to be an all-time. I think that'll stick around. That'll be on my list forever. Bring Her Back, not as good, quite honestly. But that's the issue, though, is that I think that these people get noticed and they come out with these movies and we're like, wow, what's this guy going to do next? And then there is this pressure. But I also, when you think about it, I don't think that Wes Craven and like a lot of those guys, I don't think that they were dealing with the same pressure as today because I don't think that horror was as mainstream back then, first of all.
Absolutely.
And second of all, I mean, you got to think also, some of these guys made some real shit. They did. I mean, it's true. If you look up any of their catalogs, I mean, they made some real fucking trash. So what I'm trying to get at there is that, I mean, we're thinking about Wes Craven as one of the all-time greats, and he is absolutely 100%, but over a career, I mean, with highlights, just like a lot of sports stars, for example. I mean, there's so many sports stars that we'll always remember as being some of the greats, but if you really go back and look, they had shit seasons. So, I mean, I think that only time will tell. I think that if we were to have the same conversation 10 years from now, we'd probably be like, well, that guy did pretty good. And hey, this guy here, he had a few, bangers and stuff. I mean, you got some that are still going pretty strong. Del Toro, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, he's still going pretty strong.
He'd be the one probably, in my opinion, that I would hang up there with in like Shyamalan as far as the new school kind of horror guy that I really go to and like.
And there's some people that love these guys, absolutely love the ones, that I hate the most. Eggers,
yeah.
and let's see, you have Eggers, and then there's the other one there, the one that did Midsummer.
I like
Somar.
What's that?
Midsummer.
Yeah, Ari Aster and Robert Eggers. I mean, you have some people that would swear that those two guys were the next big thing, that they were going to be like the next Romero in Craven or something. But I think they're shit. That's just my opinion. But
a lot of it has to do with that. Let's go back to Talk to Me. Extremely unique idea. Very, very cool and unique idea. And how many times in a career can you do something like that? How many times can Jordan dunk from the foul line before he's got to do something else to show that he's more than just that? You know what I mean? So,
and I think that's why when I say like Wes Craven, you look at it over a career, it's that he, probably made a great movie. And then, but also we're looking at directors and the fact that the franchises thrived back then. These guys now, they don't have the franchise to hold them up. Whereas some of the older guys, they did have the franchise. They're like, hey, Freddy Krueger worked. Let's do it another 14 times.
Right.
And so you really had that going for you. And I think that helped a lot.
Yeah, I mean, in modern day, not really horror, not horror at all for that matter, but action sci-fi would probably be like Terminator would be a great example. If you take the catalog of, what has there been, 10 Terminator movies, I believe?
But yeah.
Some of them were absolute stinkers and others were really cool. Even some of the newer ones had some good stuff to them. So you can take you can ride your own coattails a bit, I think, with a franchise like that, like Terminator, or like you said, some of these old school ones where you didn't always have to be your best. And it will go down as, well, that's not the best one, but I like 2 and 7 better than I liked 3 and 5. So it just goes to pushing something out there for the sake of moving the franchise along, which I don't think you can get away with nowadays. If you're not keeping people's attention, then you're toast and you won't get another chance. So I think that's why they've kind of gone away from franchises so much and individual character-driven horror that's repetitive, the same, Leprechaun for 10 movies, or the same, Freddy Krueger for 10 movies or whatever else. And now they rely on more unique ideas and plot points to be able to drive the ship instead of an actual character to carry the load.
Well, plus I think also another thing that I, was kind of thinking about too is that a lot of days directors are not necessarily just horror like they used to be. Like Wes Craven was a horror director, whereas a lot of guys now they're directors and they have, directed a horror movie or whatever. I don't know. It's interesting. So moving on to this section is modern horror classics. Now, regardless of where people stand, modern horror has already created classics. Movies like Get Out, Hereditary, The Witch, Train to Busan, The Conjuring, It Follows. We've mentioned a couple of those, and a couple of those I would agree with, and a couple of those I would disagree with. Have absolutely changed the genre forever. And what's interesting is a lot of these movies were initially divisive too, which happens with almost every horror classic eventually. So my question on this is, which modern horror movie becomes timeless? And we've kind of said this a little bit. We talked about Frankenstein and stuff, but what are a couple movies or a movie besides Frankenstein that stands out to you that one day we're going to be sitting there like, that's fucking classic?
I feel like Frankenstein, for at least this most recent watch, felt more dramatic than it did horror. Obviously it's a horror character and rooted in horror, but I felt it was more of a drama than it was a horror movie. And there are several dramatic or drama-based movies nowadays that have either comedy elements or horror elements or whatever else, but they're actual dramas. You don't see a whole lot of horror movies or horror franchises that almost give up all of their horror-ness to turn towards a heartfelt kind of dramatic depiction of that franchise. And I think maybe that's why I liked it so much is it around, top to bottom, it was more submersive than one trick pony, so to speak.
So you're going Frankenstein, even though my question was literally what besides Frankenstein would you say is...
I was going to let Liza answer, but I wanted to get that point out first while I still had it fresh in my head.
Liza, what one day do you feel like say 20 years from now, thinking about this era we live in at this moment right now, would you say is most likely to be, that's a fucking classic?
Sinners too. I really like Nosferatu.
Eggers.
Yeah.
I think Talk to Me has a good shot. And I also think Smile has a decent shot as well.
Smile was good. I like the Smile movies. I would definitely...
If they dropped another Smile movie and it kicked ass the same way that the last two did, I think that one could be one that could potentially continue to go on for a while. You might get 5 or 6 movies out of it.
Those are good movies. I'll give you that. I definitely think that those are great. And it's kind of difficult too, because I would also say like one of my more recent favorite horror movies has been the newest Final Destination.
Mm-hmm.
And the only thing is though, is I can't really say that because honestly, that's kind of one of those movies that has been a franchise for a long time now, so it is sort of, we're kind of still in the middle. I think we're at the end of an era, but just happened recently. Like it's probably like when the last Freddy movie came out, where it's like, okay, we're at the end of that era. So, it's not really, but I definitely think that was a great one. But then again, I'm a strange guy, though. You guys know this. I'm a little weird when it comes to movies because everybody would agree with me that Texas Chainsaw is a classic. I personally think Texas Chainsaw is the greatest horror movie of all time. I defend that a lot, and I say that a lot. And, I feel like I'm on an island with only a few people. So, like, to me, 20 years from now, I'm going to be like, Barbarian was a classic. And I bet you most people are going to be like, what are you talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Why? Huh? But to me, I'm going to feel like that was one of the best movies that we've seen recently.
Right. I think that if this type of an answer requires a little bit more than a 30-second thought process. Because there are so many movies that I have seen that take a back seat to some of the more talked about movies, like Talk to Me, for example, or Smile, or Sinners, or some of the newer ones like that have seen a lot of airtime and a lot of people talking about them, that I thought were fantastic, but just in the moment, I can't think about it. I just can't come up with something. So,
Well,
I'd
for
like
example, a personal classic to me would be one we watched, which was Dark Was the Night.
I really like that movie, but
I
there's
thought that was a great movie. I love that movie.
there's no way a movie like that can, to me, I feel that's it's too much of a B movie to be like a big name classic movie. Not that those types of movies haven't excelled in the past, but I don't know how you could take a movie that probably made $50,000 in theaters and call it a classic. It might be a cult classic.
Yeah.
I don't know if you could necessarily put it up there in the Mount Rushmore of modern horror movies, but
You're right, and that's the interesting thing is the difference between classic and cult classic, and I mean that's kind of it's and a perfect example, like I was saying, Texas Chainsaw. I think that's one of the few movies I can really think of that I think has crossed that line. That's danced around cult classic and classic, because no horror person can sit here and tell me Texas Chainsaw isn't a classic. I don't care. I mean, like whether you like it or not, it obviously played a huge role in the evolution of horror. Period.
sure.
But I mean, it's also back in the day. See, that's the thing is that when we were kids, you and I were kids and we're talking about that comic book, late night, staying up with your boys watching horror. It was a cult classic back then. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of interesting how that one is sort of, transcended, if you will.
What's funny is something that we haven't talked about. Maybe Sinister would be there.
Sinister. Yeah. Sinister was fantastic.
I think Sinister. I think we've had way too many of the Conjuring movies. My God. Yeah. I think there's been too many of
Matter
those.
Matter of fact, I think the Conjurings helped drown me on the whole supernatural, possession thing. I think the Conjurings actually are sort of maybe what beat that to death for me, quite honestly.
Yeah. If I'm being put on the spot now, I'll say that Sinister is going to be a classic 20 years from now.
I'm going to go ahead and tell you that that's a fantastic choice.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
I think that's an excellent choice. And I think that all of those deserve, we should maybe even just focus one night on that particular topic, because I feel like digging a little more, we could probably come up with some really good ones and do some kind of comparisons there and stuff like that. So, But at the end of the day, I don't think horror got worse. I think horror evolved. Old school horror reflected fears of violence, strangers, monsters, and the unknown. Modern horror reflects fears of anxiety, trauma, identity, grief, and losing control. Both eras matter. Both eras produced masterpieces. And honestly, the best horror probably happens when filmmakers take the strengths of both. The atmosphere and rawness of the classics mixed with the emotional depth and creativity of modern horror, which I think we've kind of agreed on basically in this conversation. So, folks, like, subscribe, and stick around, because whether it's old school slashers, art house nightmare fuel, practical gore, insanity, or emotional, devastating psychological horror, here on Psychopinion, we're talking about it all. All of it. We're doing the things. So, like, subscribe, and comment. And there's a lot to comment on this one, man. I mean, tell me what you like. Tell me what you don't like. Tell me what I'm wrong about. Maybe there's something I missed. I would love to know what you guys think would be your modern classic. First of all, please let us know that. If you're still here, just go ahead and pop that down there. I would love to know. I'd love to talk about that. And kind of your opinion about some of the things we discussed, whether you think that new horror or old horror are better, what's happened to horror over the years.
What's a put off nowadays? What draws you to a movie, and what steers you clear of one right out of the gate?
Yeah, and I mean, pretty soon that Steve and I are going to have to sit down and discuss that there's going to be a Long Legs 2. That's going to happen soon, because I don't know why. And I'm sure Steve probably has a different opinion on that. So stick around, and we're going to discuss things like that and other things. But in the meantime, we'll see you soon.
What a pinhead be? Where a pinhead be? What a pinhead be? Y'all about to see. Ain't gonna find me looking, searching for a ghost. Hey, hey. If they behind me, man, don't really wanna know.